videos live, and it looks like we're going. Yep, looks like we're on. We're live. My video.
All right.
Cool. So,
So,
hello everyone. This is Jeet that people have started to call me. Um, and this is another episode of the Tao of Talk, which, my intention here is just to have conversations with people. Um, Maybe sometimes on topics, maybe just freewheeling conversations. Um, Today I'm being joined by Herakles. Herakles, do you want to introduce yourself?
yeah. Hello, folks. I'm Herakles. I'm a student of psychology, a postgraduate student of psychology, and I'm here to discuss something today. We have something in mind that we'll reveal to you soon enough, I suppose.
Yeah, folks can hear you, so I don't need to tell them. You just did. Um, Hang on a second. Oh man, I'm having throat problems these days. I need to work on that, especially having an online, a voice presence online. Yeah, thank you for your introduction. We did decide we were going to try and talk about Marxism a bit today, do the best we can with it. Um, and
Yeah.
so far, we're being joined by TiVo. TiVo might find some of that interesting. Let's see, or maybe insightful. Who knows? We'll see. Do you want to kick us off? Because I think you had we've had conversations in the past, and you kind of got inspired to. I don't know. Did you read? Did you research Marx? Did you learn anything? Or are these things you already know? Yada yada yada.
When it comes to Marx, one of the things I'd been introduced to him long ago. And yes, whenever I spoke to Cheat in the past, one of the things that I've realized about Marx is that he wanted the best for people. There might be questions about whether what he did accomplished what it ought to, what it should have accomplished. But I do believe that he had the best of intentions. And as far as reading about him, I have read about him. I've been reading about him. I wouldn't say I'm particularly a scholar or an expert, but I do read about him every once in a while. That effect.
Mm.
Yes.
Me too. It's been a he's been a fascination of mine. I've followed a lot of people who further his philosophies, ideas, economic critiques. Um, and you're right. I think he did want the best for people. I mean, I think he was striving for what we would call a classless, stateless society, and using that as critiques against current, free market, as you might call it, or capitalist focused economies and the flaws
Mm.
that occur within them. So, but you think about it, a classless, stateless society, in order to achieve that, you'd have to have some nominal level of equality. And, that's a good thing, in my opinion.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. I believe a lot of his focus essentially was about the economic aspect of inequality, how economics play a crucial role in promoting and perpetuating inequality. His focus has been so far about the revolution of the economic classes, essentially the conflict between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie. There's always this question that has often arisen in my mind about it, that you cannot necessarily bring forth a revolution just because people have been oppressed, because they also have something to benefit from. The problem is that in this entire structure that we live in, it's not only that you have somebody who oppresses you. More often than not, many of such people also oppress somebody else. So there's this hierarchy of oppression. So these people also get to oppress others as long as they are willing to be oppressed themselves. So the idea is simply how I suppose what René Girard would put it. The idea is that as long as you get to shackle anybody else, you also let yourself be shackled. So this is the foundation of humanity, and this idea of Karl Marx that I find somewhat questionable. I don't say that it is truly wrong in the complete sense, but the idea that the worker has nothing to lose but his chains. The thing is that he has something to lose. He has to lose his ability to chain others, his ability to shackle others, the possibility of being able to shackle others in the future. And I think that's a fear many people have,
Mm,
and that's a
mm.
problem we face as a society about Karl Marx ideology.
So there's a lot there. I suppose a lot of people want to say that he incited or inspired revolution, which a lot of people interpret as chaos or bad, or you know,
Hmm.
um, do you get that from him? Like he was trying to inspire revolution, trying to vie for upheaval, or was he, you know, yeah, I'll save what I think, but I just what are your thoughts on his maybe desires for revolution or overthrowing the bourgeoisie, if you will. What do you think?
Okay, so there are two aspects to this idea. So I do believe that he believed in the idea of revolution, that you have to get rid of the bourgeoisie. But I do not believe, and I believe for a fact that you cannot and you must not have him as somebody who inspired Lenin or people like that, right? Mao, Lenin. These people are very different from Marx in the sense that they sought to control the resources. They sought to control the resources. They wanted essentially a centrally planned economy. And I'm pretty sure, and this seems rather certain, that this is not what Karl Marx desired. This is not what Karl Marx wanted. He wanted that everybody should have ownership of the resources, ownership of the industry, and everything, right? And this is not what these communist revolutionary accomplished. However, I do believe that Karl Marx promoted the idea of revolution, and he believed that revolution would somehow bring about socialism, which would in turn bring about communism. Now, how that would actually transition, that's the problem. It becomes more and more difficult. Although initially socialism and communism were used interchangeably, now there is this distinction that has been drawn, like socialism is a step towards communism. So it really depends on how you define these terms, since definition of these terms happen to change all the time. So I do believe that advocated for, he argued for revolution, but not in the sense that Mao and Lenin brought it forth. Yes, if that's
Right. Yeah.
valid enough an answer.
A revolution. I see. Yeah, that's kind of how I view it. It's more of a revolution in thought than it is a forceful, physical, kinetic revolution against oppressive powers. Um, I follow a lot of people in economics, and some of them, are professors, and they cover Marx. And um, the most overt thing I get from them, like Professor Richard Wolff, for instance, he's he
Hmm.
speaks German natively. And this is my problem with
Hmm.
Marx is like most of Marx, Engels' writings, all that, were in German. So I can't get an accurate representation minus reading other people's interpretations of his work and having to assume that they got
Hmm.
the interpretations right. But everything that I hear is Marx wasn't really inspiring anything. He was more critiquing everything and saying, this is what I observe. This is how we could do better. If
Hmm.
revolution were a part of that mechanism, you know, there may be some form of always whenever there's a difference in ideas in whatever the social truths are, the culturally fabricated things that become the most important for no other reason because they were and people think they have to continue that way. um, there wasn't this desire to have a physical revolution or revolt, but you know those things happen when we have revolutionary ideas, if you will. Um, so yeah, that's what I take. That's from my interpretations of everything I've read, from the people that I've listened to. It's not that he was. I agree with you. I don't think he was inspiring revolution, and I also agree with you with those other toxic figures. It's like I always say, you can't. An apple is not an orange just because you say it's an orange. Maoism, Leninism, Stalinism, all that was not pure, like sort of a pure investigation of Marxism. In my opinion, it was more cherry picking for for what they saw was important, but equality has always lacked. Equality,
Mhm.
which is basically a foundational principle, I would extract from Marx. Once again, you can't
Mhm.
have a classless, stateless society unless people are generally equal. So
Mhm.
take that how you will. But what are your comments on that?
Yeah, so that's true. I don't necessarily want to get into the fact that he spoke German and he wrote in German and we do not speak German. This is the same argument for me as is often used for religions, the idea that this religion was written in this particular language and this is how it ought to be interpreted. And I don't know, even if I spoke German for that matter, I do not, just to be clear. But even if I spoke German to be matter, for that matter, there's always a possibility that I'd misinterpret because at the end of the day, words are by nature ambiguous. So I really do not like the idea of getting into that. I understand that. I understand where it's coming from, and I understand the relevance of it. That there's a possibility of mistranslation. There always is. But I'd say that even if you speak it, there's still a possibility of mistranslation at the end of the day.
Yeah,
You can't help it. This is just a part and parcel of language.
I mean,
Now,
I agree with you.
coming
Yeah,
down,
go ahead.
now
Sorry.
coming down to the next part about it. Yeah. So now coming down to the next part about it, the idea that you need some sort of minimal equality as a prerequisite to communism, right? This idea that you need it. The problem, it's not only about economic equality, it's also about social equality, it's also about perceived equality. You can't really have, even if, let's say, you somehow make all people equal in terms of wealth, there's a possibility that they would still try to distinguish themselves based on some other arbitrary category, like where they are from, what religion they practice, or what skin color they have. All of these things would come to matter a lot more if you do so. As soon as you bring all people into the same class, what ends up happening is that now they want to distinguish themselves even more so than they do at any other point. So now all of those other differences would be maximized. So in order to bring about the revolution that people think Karl Marx could bring forth, you need too many factors, not only economic equality, you need social equality. Not only relative economic equality, you need relative social equality. You need relative perceived equality. People must perceive others and themselves as equal. They must do so. And it becomes more and more difficult given our current circumstances. So I do think that Karl Marx had a good assessment of what the problem was and how the world ought to be. So let me be clear. He knew what the problem was and how the world was wrong. He knew how to fix it in the sense that he knew what it ought to be, what it should become. But I do not think he had a very clear path for achieving it. That's where my primary criticism lies with Marx. But I don't think it's his fault. He did very much in his time, and he had been a genuine contributor to the improvement of the worker class for the past century because he has been inspiring revolution that have made other companies and other monopolies a lot more anxious about oppressing people, a lot more anxious about exploiting people, a lot more anxious about marginalizing people. So in a way, there is this shadowy presence of Karl Marx everywhere because these people fear that if there's nothing left truly, if there's nothing left for these workers but to lose their shackles, lose their chains, these people also fear it. It's true that even the greatest of corporates, even the largest of corporates, can hate Marx but cannot ignore him. This is the truth of the matter. So that's how I think about him, honestly.
Hmm, hmm, hmm. Yeah. So, well, to just back up and cover the language thing, I agree with you that all language, even if you're two native speakers, can misinterpret each other, and not only just mistakenly, but divisively so as well. And that's kind of where my problem lies with the language barrier because, um, you can have people who read German, interpret the German misappropriately on purpose, maybe, or maybe with some underhanded nature. Maybe they're being genuine and honest, and they want to be divisive about how to interpret him because they don't like what Marx says. So they want to counteract what he's trying to inspire. And I mean, there's evidences of this all over the place of books that are written that say he only wanted chaos and revolution. He was a racist. He was, whatever labels you want to assign for him. But when you do the actual, like, for me, as close as I can get, just, and I'm not trying to use this as an excuse, but as close as I can get is the best representation from his writings. Um,
Mm.
I still think I have a good understanding, even though I don't speak German, because I listen to people who do, and I think want to interpret him genuinely from the words that I've interpreted. Instead of taking an approach of reading one source, I jump around to lots of different sources and I try and get the general feeling of what might the author's purposes in being writing about someone. Um, Another example is like Jordan Peterson and Zizek when they did their interview. Jordan Peterson he's a scholar. He's got some clout in the academic realm, but he takes a pretty sort of typical McCarthyist, anti-communist, anti-socialist, anti-Marxist stance when he's doing his interpretations in the interview. So this is just what I guard myself. Um, and as for the rest of what you said, I think I lost it. So, do you mind
That's fine. That's
you
fine.
mind repeating the stuff past the language thing?
Yeah, okay, okay. I was just speaking about how economic inequality is just not the only problem, not the only setback to the achievement of communism. You also have to account for social inequality. You also have to account for perceived inequality. You cannot get away without fixing those problems. And
Hmm.
unless they come before the arrival of economic equality, you cannot even have economic equality in the first place. So
Mm-mm-mm.
it's a terrible mess.
Right.
So
And when I say like a level of equality, that's what he wanted. That's what I think it was. It covers that spectrum because he would observe immigrants coming from other countries and just make the rational observation that they are not in the same economic circumstances in which the economy that they're entering, right? So other people will read this and say this is kind of racist. He thinks immigrants shouldn't come here because they're not economically or socially or whatever equal. When in doubt, he was just pointing out that they're not. They come in if they have brown skin different than the lighter skinned people, or they have not as much money because they're coming from strife or trying to escape or desperation. They're not going to be in great circumstances. So these are observations. And this, I don't think I think the what I'm hearing you say is, and what I'd like to say is that he wasn't giving anybody rules or things to follow to achieve the right place. He was making critiques and observations of what he felt were better ways to do things in opposition to, for the labor class, for the ones being exploited by the employers, the bourgeois, the rich, the powerful, the people who had the haves and the have nots. Um, so that's kind of the way I interpret it. Tivo wants to come up and say something. Do you want to you want to let Tivo come up here?
absolutely, let him come.
You have the stage, sir. Can't hear you if you're talking.
Might be, yeah, yeah.
Technical difficulties. Discord being
Possible.
screwed, which happens.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Well,
that's what I said.
anyways. All right. Well, let's just move on then. Yeah. So, I guess to sum up what I was saying is it was, more of critiques, his observations. I mean, let's not forget Marx was an economist first and foremost. So he was just critiquing how economies are unfair, unequal, and could be managed better to make sure that we don't have concentrations of wealth and inequality. So,
Yeah, that's primarily who he was as a person. I mean, I absolutely adore the idea that everybody should be equal and everybody should have equal resources, but it becomes more and more difficult in the society that we live in. I do not know if I agree with Marx to the extent that he proposed that idea, that everybody should be absolutely equal. That's not something I necessarily agree with, and I'm pretty sure we too have a disagreement about this matter.
Mm,
So, but I
mm,
do agree that people should have access to basic amenities, that people should have access to food, should have access to homing, to housing, should have access to housing, should have access to education. All people should have access to all the opportunities possible because that's how we create a fair society. I do not believe that everybody should be able to live in an equally large house. Everybody should have equal amounts of wealth. I do not have much of a problem with concentration of wealth per se, in the sense that if everybody has been given equal rights in terms of uh, good healthcare, good housing, good food, all of that, and it's assured for everybody, it's insured for everybody, in that case, it's okay to me.
mm,
Like,
mm,
even if some people happen to be richer than I am, as long as I'm getting by and I'm having what I consider a decent life, I'm okay with it. And as long as that's true for everybody. It's not like you could have some people starving, you would have some people not getting an education. That's not okay. So to that effect, I'm okay with an hierarchy. But then again, there are problems because in this system, the problem is that ultimately the concentration of wealth also translates to political power, and political power ultimately translates to the oppression of the poor. So there's this inherent structure to it that causes the oppression of the poor. So I don't know if this could actually happen. It might actually be equally arduous to pull this off. You know, some people say that communism is difficult to pull off, difficult to implement. I'd say that this might be equally difficult. This might be equally arduous because at the end of the day, as soon as you have this power imbalance, there's going to be consequences. So it makes me a lot more uncertain about my opinion as well. So I suppose I'm still formulating my opinion on the matter.
mm.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I've wandered into the realm of a few hyperbolic stories and a few hypothetical situations that you know that I kind of rationalize through these things with. Um,
Mm,
one like the power struggle thing. It is
mm,
exactly what I think you're describing, which seems to me like a positive feedback loop. The more once you have some power, that power allows you to have more power to control power and keep controlling power and then
yeah.
add to it and get more power and keep oppressing the others, which gives you more power. And that does seem to be the part of the natural struggle, um, to
Mm,
to some degree. So that's why I think the real only answer is some level of like I want to make the distinguish I want to distinguish between the fact that we know we're not all born equal, right? Minus genetic engineering, epigenetics, bioengineering, cyborgism, transhumanism of the future, and where maybe we can make everybody really equal or very close to equal. I don't know if that's even a desire, but we know we're born unequal, right? In at least in certain capabilities, we know that there's certain portions of society that cannot do anything for themselves. We know that there's going to be certain portions of society who are going to be, as far as what they're doing, what's necessary in circumstances in their life, the top of their achievement compared to everybody else. I mean, we know these things exist, but the only thing I can classify it or categorize it is that it's the social rights, it's the legal rights, it's what everybody is due, deserved in an inalienable fashion, above and beyond how they're born. Taking in all those circumstances, like should someone be in power, or should someone who isn't able to take care of TiVo, we'll catch you in a bit. Someone who isn't able to take care of themselves, is it our responsibility to take care of them, or should they just have to go fend for themselves the best they can? I mean, all these questions, I guess, sort of hover around that moral ethical code, um, of which I know there, at least not I know, but I believe there is no moral foundation to make these justifications or claims for. But I live in a world where I want that equality. I don't want people to say, well, I know more than you, so therefore I'm better than you. It's like, no, I just know something else that you don't. Most likely somebody else knows something that I don't. Um, I don't know why that's such a hard concept. And as far as like wealth concentration and everybody being able to be equal from an economic standpoint, I like to make the hypothetical of, and it's not even necessarily a hypothetical. It's something that could realistically probably become true in the future, which is, let's say some space agency has the ability to go out to the asteroid belt and drag back an asteroid. I mean, they could probably have their pick of the litter, and some of them may contain enough ore in them to dwarf the whole world's economy several times over, meaning that person or that company or that group would now be the wealthiest person, company, or group, whatever that size is, over the entire Earth. So what do we do there? Does that wealth go to everybody so we can all live equally because now we have plenty? Or do we leave it at them and now we've got basically one giant monarchy, imperial system where we have one or a very small group of rich leaders who torment the subjects, the masses, and make them vie for status and hierarchy. Um, I see that second option as dystopian, as a nightmare. So my only answer there is equality. But I agree with you in the sense that I think we need transition. There's no switches we're going to turn to make things better overnight. If we did, we'd probably have mass chaos, revolt, revolution, civil war, dying, death, all that war, all that stuff. And I think the best transition to that is to make sure that people have some, at least first off, some foundational basic human rights like housing, food, water, shelter, healthcare, education, all the public services to make sure that we're safe, yada yada yada. I think we can achieve that easily. I think that's a low bar to set personally. But we still have these, what I would call, illusions of limited resources that aren't limited. They're just limited because certain people have control over those resources and don't want you to have it all because it keeps them in power. They can kind of feed it out to the public as they need to keep themselves in their circumstances. Um, so I'm for transition periods. I'm for doing things better. Um, yeah, I don't know. I just talked a whole lot. So why don't you respond to some of it?
Yeah, that makes sense. I then get your point. I understand where you're coming from and why. And the example that you came up with, first let me address that example. Yeah. So suppose that there's this company which actually finds such enormous resources that they can now control the world. They are essentially the monopoly over the world. They have become essentially a monarchy, yeah, or a plutocracy as it is often described. Um, let's say they become that. In that case, I do believe that you would have to share those resources because now the resources are so great that you have to make a distribution. Yes, I agree. I'm not against the idea, right? You would have to distribute those resources because at that point, what ends up happening is that now the power dynamic has shifted so greatly to their favor that it can't really function that way. Because in that case, what you're doing now is that you have these people who can essentially decide your life for you. They can determine what you do and what happens to you because now they have such enormous influence over the world. We could pretend that human beings are nice, human beings are kind, human beings are all good. But once people have that much power, there are times that these powers could be exploited. That's it. All of these people are absolutely wonderful human beings and they do the greatest for humanity. The problem, they would have descendants, and their descendants would have descendants, and their descendants would have descendants. And do you believe that all of them will be good? No, absolutely not. And as soon as you have somebody terrible in the generation, you are doomed because they are so much more powerful than you are. They're so much more intelligent than you are in the sense that they have access to such resources and they can utilize them and they have been acquainted with them. So, so now they have such resources. They have uh, 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 such resources up their sleeves. They have such power up their sleeves, such influence up their sleeve that they can essentially dictate your life for you. And that's just unacceptable to me. So at that point, I'm like, yes, you have to distribute these resources. Perhaps the person who found it first could keep a little bit more than others, but that's it. You'd have to distribute it nevertheless. Right.
Mm,
A
mm,
little bit more than others, like a very little bit more, not
mm,
much.
mm,
So it really depends. I'd say that I'm not for absolute equality. That's what I say. I'm not for absolute equality or wealth.
mm,
Not yet, at least. I might change my mind or I might become a lot more capitalistic if there are factors that convince me otherwise. Because I believe that you have to be open to evidence. If there's genuine evidence that suggests, look, communism doesn't make sense, inequality doesn't make sense, human behavior cannot be modeled or molded in such manner, then I'm like, okay, I'd have to change my opinion. I would have to be more pragmatic. And if that is not so, if I believe that, look, what is true is that you have to have the best form of communism. You'd have to implement communism, and that's the only right way. And that's what science dictates. That's what science seems to be indicating. Then I'd have to move towards that. I think that is the utmost conviction of anybody who believes in the scientific principle, the idea that you have to convict to facts, regardless of what I believe. I'm open to changing my mind as soon as I found evidence in favor of one side or the other. That's my view of it.
Mm, mm, mm.
If that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it does. So it puts me in a couple places. Like number one, resources don't have to be shared. If somebody manages to go get them and bring them back, there's no saying that they have to share them. Humanity may revolt against them and try and make them share it. They may have enough to maintain a military to maintain dominance on the planet. Who knows? There's nothing saying one thing or the other. There's also nothing saying that that person who went back and got it and now owns it could be completely altruistic and could decide that they will share it with all of humanity and make us, you know, a more equal, fair, equitable place. Um, so in that spectrum, all things are possible. What it comes down to me is like what I think is right, what I think should happen, and accepting the fact that I know that there's no really real moral foundation backing up that what I think is right is actually right. I also make the case of, I did it in yesterday's show, as a matter of fact, that if, or yeah, I think the early one, but if Elon Musk becomes the emperor of the earth and propels humanity into the future, that's just what happens. You know, in that spectrum of things, it's also possible humanity could just be extinguished after he dies. That's seeming to be a pretty good possibility right now. So that's why I think it's not a great idea, because whatever we're doing right now isn't working right. Um, I'd also like to eliminate that, in that spectrum, there's techno optimism. So technology could solve our problems for the future. So these are all realms of possibilities, and I don't think there's any shoulds or oughts there. It's only what's going to happen. I know what I'd like to see happen. I know the directions a lot of things are going that I don't think are the right directions for things to be going. But who's to say one is right or wrong in those circumstances? I don't know. I feel like we've wandered off a little bit, and are we still on Marxism, or do we need to wrap back around and say go Marx, like with your yin and yang on your forehead? Oh, actually, I wanted to bring up that other story too, the one that I always bring up with Robert Sapolsky of the baboons, right? The baboon troop who lost their aggressive males, and by that seeming quote unquote act of God of losing their aggressive males, their society became safer. And so I like to keep that in the realm of possibilities, that it's possible some circumstances could evolve that may make things better for everybody, where maybe we come to a global decision. And yes, there's always going to be the fringe. There's going to be the people who aren't going to comport. They aren't going to play nice. But maybe we could get society to a more equal place. I think the things that you talk about making sure that people have those fundamental basic rights, I think that's a good step in that right direction. I think it could even be the thing that leads us into the future, possibly, as TiVo brings up. It's democratic social control. There is importance to democracy in there. To what degree, I'm not certain yet, because we certainly don't have democracy figured out yet, um, in my opinion. But I agree that there's a democratic process that needs to happen in there. And well, in my opinion, it happens easier when we have equality. But we could go further into that if you want. I'm gonna let you talk.
Yeah, that is true. It's a messy world, honestly, in that regard. And I agree that you could possibly have a future in which everything is just gloomy, everything just dies out. Okay, TVO. So the thing is that you could have such a future, and it's absolutely possible. I don't know if what Elon Musk is doing right now would lead us there. I'm not quite sure about that. He could actually lead us to a better future, or he could essentially destroy humanity. I do not know. Neither do you, neither does anybody on the planet, probably not even him. So, given that, it's like there's so many factors, there are so many variables in this question that we could barely begin to answer. It's not possible. We do not fathom what it is all about, honestly. And to me, that is what it is. So, and you said, look, you spoke about what is and what should be, right? In the sense that you spoke about if that's what propels us to the future, it does. I'm like, yeah, that's true. But you and I, or and everybody on the planet, has some sort of a wish in the sense that they want certain things to happen. And that's when they say, look, this should happen. What they mean is that that's what they want to happen. That's what they want to happen. So that's the thing. And in that sense, what I'm implying is that I do not necessarily want complete equality of wealth. And Marx would say that you need complete equality of wealth. Complete, absolutely complete. Like everybody should be on an equal plane, right? Classless, casteless, uh, uh, essentially borderless society. That's the idea behind Marxism. And I'm actually in favor of the idea of not having any borders. All people should actually live with one another. I believe that in that idea. In an ideal world, we shouldn't have borders. I believe humanity is a race, and we shouldn't be worried about that. In that sense, I do appreciate his idea that there should be this world order. My father's cabinet. I can't hear you.
Sorry, I was bookmarking a topic because I want to let Tivo speak, and I didn't want to forget the topic. Tivo came up here, wanted to say something, so I want to let them go.
Oh, yeah, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right. So,
That,
in that sense, it makes sense to me. So, I believe we have only a slight disagreement on this matter, except for what it ought to be. So, that's what I said. Like, of course, there is a future that both of us do not want, right? That's true. Something, but there's this
oh,
possibility that
yeah, you guys talk amongst yourselves. I'll be right back. 2 seconds.
okay, Kiva, you wanted to say something? Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I mean, I would probably say that I think there is a difference between the idea of equality and the idea of sameness. In other words, I think often in political discourse, equality gets reduced to sameness, and if that's, and I don't think that's a fair representation of equality as an ideal. But um, and then the other thing would be just I think there is something to the idea that, while I certainly agree that other kinds of equality do have to be worried about, social equality, things like that. Uh, I do think there is something to the idea that economic equality is the foundation for all other kinds of equality, because economic equality essentially is about possessing the means to, for lack of a better way of putting it, assert your equality. Um, so it basically, if women are not economically equal, then you cannot help but have them find themselves in a subservient place to men. If children are the economic wards of the state or of their parents, then naturally they will be subservient to the state or to their parents. So I do think, and 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 then the last thing I would say is that while perfect equality, however you define that, may be functionally unobtainable in a perfect sense, I do think that history shows that regardless of even the system at play, that some form of relative level of equality is necessary for a free society to exist. Um, I mean, I could give specific examples of this, but I'll stop for now.
I missed a lot of that because I had to step away. We have contractors working in our house at the moment. So, Heracles, do you want to try and address what Tivo said, or Kahneman Don, do you have something you want to say?
Mm,
I agree with what Tebow said. with economics being a really great equalizer, um, if, for example, if you have the money to pay a lawyer, chances are you're not paying the ticket. Uh, but if you don't have the money to pay the attorney, you're paying the ticket. A lot of people that I know personally, uh, even when they receive an erroneous uh, civil infraction, a speeding ticket, for example, um, it's much, much cheaper to admit their guilt, even when they're not guilty, than to go and fight it. And with equal protection under the law clause, I can say it's not being doled out as it should be, because we've seen in this country time and time again, and across the world, if you're rich enough, you're not responsible for what you do.
I think we caught most of that. You started roboting a bit.
Oh, sorry about that.
No, that's all right. I think we caught the gist of what you said. Yeah, and I agree. Tivo, did you want to respond to that?
No, I'm good.
Heracles, you got anything you want to say?
I have an objection to this entire idea. This idea that you should have economic equality as the basis of everything.
Mm.
So one of the problems that I have with this entire idea is that how could you possibly convince all people to actually fight for such an equality? How could you convince people to actually advocate for, actually vote people into office, those people that would actually bring about this policy, that would actually bring about the equality that you speak of, the economic equality that you speak of? You cannot do it unless there is social equality at hand. Because unless there is social equality, they would not even essentially be in a situation where they could do so. Let me put it this way. So, as long as people have this idea that, look, you and I, you and I are different. Let's say that you are white and I'm black, or however you want to put it. Let's say that some people have this notion that these people are different, these people are different. They're already divided amongst themselves. So they care much more about fighting one another instead of fighting for equality in the sense of economic equality. So unless there's social equality, unless people genuinely believe that everybody is equal regardless of race, faith, and all of those things, they will not fight for equality because they have their personal uh, group ideals to fight for, to advocate for. So you're right, but you cannot bring about economic equality without social equality. It's not going to happen without perceived equality, without social equality. You can never bring about economic equality because you cannot unite people. That's the thing.
Well, I personally do not, if I may, I don't think that the pathway to the thing you want is a direct path to the thing that you want with an appeal to the thing that you want. I generally notice that the pathway to any goal or ideal is, I'm trying to think of a more positive word, but for lack of a better, I'll just go with the negative words: subtle or subversive. In other words, you kind of jujitsu your way, you kind of ninja your way to it. Um, so uh, I would say that part of what where you would get to a level of equality is to, instead of talking about equality, wherein people are already thinking of, well, I do more work than this person, and this person's a lazy bum. So, why would I want to be equal with that person? Uh, Instead, you engage with where people are currently. So, if you instead talk about, well, who owns the grocery store in your neighborhood, and what does that do? Who owns the bank? Who owns the, like, when you start talking about, because most people want to be capital owners. When you start, so I would say that you meet people where they are and what they want for themselves, and instead you're providing a way for them to achieve the thing that they want. It's not the thing that they think that they want, because everyone thinks that they want to become Elon Musk, and it's like, well, no, that's not what you're offering them, but you are offering them the way to have a good life, which is what they really want. um and so, if you start to talk about, well, maybe, you should own the neighborhood. You should, in a sense, that you and your neighbors should own your neighborhood. And certainly this is not, and this is a different idea than private control, where large corporations can extract wealth from your guys' hard labor and then send it off to China or New York or wherever they want, and then use it against you. And then it's also a different idea than this idea of state control, because the way that our government is set up, anytime the state sets up an enterprise, well, it's filtered through whatever legislative body the people have. And we already know that those bodies are corrupt. We already know that the way that they get selected, that even though we elect them, it's corrupt, and we have no direct say in the way that state-run enterprises are run, and we have no real democratic control over them. And so basically, it runs into the problem that you were talking about, that basically you have other people telling them how they have to live their lives. And so again, this is why I think equality and democratic control, equality and democracy, it's kind of a virtuous cycle. Like, you can pick whichever one you want to get into that cycle, but I think you need both, and that they are both necessary in order to not just accomplish the thing, but to actually have people feel satisfied with that arrangement, even if you don't use those words to get them to it. Again, I wouldn't say democratic control. I would talk about the fact that because they are owners, that they now get to elect their board of directors, and that they can remove the CEO. In other words, it is the function of their ownership, which is what people think about in the system we currently have, rather than equality or democracy, even though it functionally is both of those things. Anyway, I'll stop rambling.
Do you want to respond to any of that, Herakles?
I've been speaking for a while. I'll let you speak first.
Oh, well, I think I extract some things from what Tebow is saying, and I think I agree in some ways. And correct me if I'm wrong here, Tebow. Is like the equality is not something we're going to achieve. It's something we have to strive for and make efforts to, and do course correction, and use sort of the democratic control process in order to navigate and guide that. We have systems in place, but those systems are not completely functional. There are some obvious places where, I don't. So here's where we might divide. I'm not going to sit here and say it's completely corrupt. I'm not going to say we have zero control. I think there are things in there that I would declare overtly are wrong and we should not be doing. Um, so, anyways, beyond all that, yeah, it's a work in progress. I agree. I agree with equality. I had an example of equality though regarding markets, and also on the side I think of what Herakles is saying. Um, my example that I always bring up is my father's cabinet in there that he made with his own two hands. He painted. It's still got the original paint job on it, and it's the only one in the world of its kind. because I have that and other people might want it, and it because the power in their desire to have something increases its quote unquote value or how we value something, does that make me unequal and, you know, different from other people that needs a leveler? Like, do we need to make a replica for everybody? Or do we have to share it? Do we have to pass it around? Can I not have it? Do we just have to destroy it? And that goes into like, am I allowed to create my own things? Um, so I think regarding this is my philosophy. My philosophy is markets are never going to go away because they emerge too easily. If two people have things they want to trade based on value, it's probably going to happen, and we're not going to do much to stop it. I think what we should do is accept markets are going to exist. We should heavily regulate them to make sure that wealth and power doesn't get concentrated in a place where it becomes malignantly out of control. And otherwise, we should try and provide as general of a, well-being life for everybody in civilization because we have the capability to. For the most part, we have the ability to provide people with good housing, good food, good water, all those, things that I consider inalienable rights. So I think that goes along the lines of there can't ever be true equality. It's, just like we can't be born truly equal, there are powers that be that are going to allow us to not be equal. We just have to constantly measure them and temper them and make sure that they're, that's a hard thing to do in and of itself, though, because I think we talked about goals earlier. And, unless we have aligned goals, we can deviate from that equality pretty easily, pretty simply. Pretty much all somebody has to say is, nope, I've got this thing, I'm in power and control of it, it gives me a power and control to stay in control, I can cycle that back by oppressing people who want to help or want to take my power. All those things are possible. So I guess I'm divided between the both of you. Yeah, I think it's something we have to work for, but it's something we're never going to fully achieve, if you will. Does any of that make sense? Anybody? Bueller?
I think the part that I was talking about that you were gone for was I was pushing back on the idea of equality as sameness. Because I think in political discourse it gets reduced too much
Right. Yeah, I would agree.
to
Absolutely.
sameness.
Yeah.
And to be sure, there is a level of nominality to the equality, as a something that we make so rather than because we say it is so, rather than something that is necessarily always by default the case, whether we say so or not. However, I do think that economic equality is a relative level of economic equality is one of those ways where we actually make it more factually so, rather than just we say so, therefore we're going to act like it's so.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm kind of in the realm, I think, with what Herakles said is we need to have social equality, because if we don't have social equality, then economic inequality is probably going to follow. But that's just where I live. Is that what you were getting at, Herakles?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd say that's a fair representation of my view.
I still think that economic equality precedes social equality.
Possibly. It could be a feedback system where maybe neither one is most important. And if you have one, the other comes along. It might just be part of that naturalistic cycle in us to want to strive for survival, predictability for the future. In that predictability, we want to enhance our predictability for the future. And that instantly sort of drives us into that nature of more, because we want to be safe. We want ours to be safe. We want theirs to be safe. It's almost like I avoid trying to be naturalistic. I don't think anything is destined in that sense. But right now it seems like we can't break that power cycle, and get that equality that we need to the level of an equal society.
Well, it's not. I would say it's not necessarily about making necessarily everyone equal. You just need to make enough people relatively equal.
Maybe,
And
yeah.
the example I would point to this is the post-war years, um, where sure, the level of equality for people who were minorities was not as, the disparity was still pretty great. However, for white people, there was a relative level of equality, and you had a very vigorous middle class, and you had a generation, baby boomers, that grew up in that environment. And because they had the economic security, um, I think that that allows people the space on a subconscious level to engage more with ideas of social equality. So, women's liberation, civil rights movement, Vietnam War protests, things like that. Whereas in our day, I would say we have the reverse, where people are economically insecure. They're increasingly economically insecure. And so you're seeing the rise of sexism and racism in a way that seems backsliding, because people are now in a competition for resources, and because they do not feel economically secure, they're going to start cutting people out of that. They're going to want to start cutting people out, whether that's racial minorities, whether that's immigrants, whether that's uh, uh, things like that. So basically, like I think that social progress is predicated on economic, not just economic stability, but economic security. And I would say that the same thing happened in Germany, back in Weimar Germany, and in the after
All
World
through
War One and
history.
things like.
Yeah, all through. I mean, we've got the Islamic Revolution. We have Thomas Cromwell during Henry VIII times. We have every time in history where the leadership, the ones at the top, have fed back into the lower socioeconomic strata of society. It's led us to things like knowledge revolution, scientific understanding, people climbing the socioeconomic ladder, all those things. I totally agree with you. I wouldn't disagree with you on any of that. The place where it bothers me is, since then, look at the erosion that has happened of that system of which you're speaking. So it's again, I agree with you that that's a good thing. That's where we should be. The complete contrast to that is we have people that don't believe we should be there and want to erode that because they want to stay. They want society to, be in this cycle because it's just about them. Or maybe there's it's a complicated thing. I can't sum it up by one simple phrase to say it's just about them. Some of it is just, I don't know. It seems natural in some of the systems that we've imposed. It's complicated, is what I would say. Um, so, anyways, Heracles, you got anything you want to comment?
Oh, I mean, there's a lot, but I'd just stick to one thing. I believe that you cannot have, and as Jeet put it, even though there's a slight disagreement with TPO and I, but I'll just make it clear, I absolutely do not think that you could have economic equality absent of social equality. It's just not going to happen because you cannot unite people. And if you cannot unite people, you might be able to pull off a revolution out of hatred, out of contempt, out of envy. But at the end of the day, you have nothing to unite over. Soon enough, you'll have it all fall apart and you'll have something similar to Leninism. That's all it
I
would
mean,
have to
I'm
be.
not necessarily a revolutionary, so.
Yeah, yeah.
No, even
Nor
not,
am I,
even in
but
democracy, you can't manage it.
Although I don't think there's any such thing really as being a revolutionary as a position. I think that revolution is a tool,
mm,
uh, and there are conditions for revolution and there are conditions against revolution. Like, you know, I'm not, me saying I'm not a revolutionary does not preclude me engaging in revolutionary behavior if the situation arose to that. I don't, you know.
yeah, I
I think
kind of
I
see.
think there's a timely a contextual analysis that has to be done to decide what you do and what you don't do.
Yeah, yeah. I kind of read it as like there we have these strong pushes of ideology or power, power control, economic control, and then there's always within those cycles of those exacerbations, there's always exacerbated responses, depending on how perceived the push is from the public is, depends on the magnitude of the response, if you will. So, like in the US right now, we have a lot of wealth accumulating and a lot of people falling into dire circumstances, or if they're not already there. And eventually that's going to culminate to response. I mean, things like Luigi Mangione and stuff, those are just signs. Those are signs of what's to come, in my opinion, if things continue here in that same trajectory. You know, now granted, I want to correct one thing. I will say there are other countries that are doing it much better than we are and are doing it pretty well. Um, so who knows what the future has to hold, I think, in those regards. Anybody got anything to say? Have we beat this topic to death today?
I'm pretty sure we have not. It's just that, we have gotten into such depth of it, and there's just a clear disagreement about we see it,
Hmm. That's all right.
right?
Disagreements are
Especially,
okay, right?
especially TN.
Yeah,
Yeah, absolutely, they
yeah.
are. They are, but it's just a foundational disagreement. It's not something that I would like to advocate for or against. It's all about what it means to. Okay, so let me put it this way. What matters is that what turns out to be right. If TVO is right, you could have economic equality before social equality, and you could see that in practice. This is something that we could observe happening. If we can't do so, then in that case it can't happen. That's how I think about it, right? Because there are attempts at it, and if there is genuine possibility of that happening, I'll see it happen probably. Probably not. Maybe I'll not see it happen. Maybe humanity will see it happen. Maybe after my lifetime, but we'll see it happen nevertheless. And if we do not see it happen, the thing is that it can't happen in my opinion, or at least it's not probable. At least it's improbable.
Mm,
That's my take on it.
I
And I
got you.
think it is improbable, and he thinks it is not. It is not improbable. So this is the difference. And
Hmm.
I believe the only way we could figure out who's right is just by observing the future.
Yeah.
So that's how
Well,
I think about
how do
it.
we do that? We can't observe the future. So, yeah. So
Yeah,
I
that's the
get it.
thing.
I think I get what you're saying is, and let me reframe my, or not reframe, but restate. I think TiVo is like, socio or economic equality is the foundation that will, be that equaling factor, if you will. And I think what you're saying is social equality is probably more important and maybe
No, I
possibly
mean
unachievable.
social equality must precede. Social equality must precede economic
Right,
equality.
right.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And do you think that, but you think social equality is not achievable? Or maybe it is.
Well, absolute social equality is not achievable, but enough social equality is achievable that could bring about some form of economic equality. Yes.
Mm, mm, mm. Gotcha.
Yeah, I suppose that would be a fundamental disagreement because I look at history and I see the exact opposite, that social equality is social progress, that's progress towards social equality is predicated upon uh, economic,
Mm.
a
I would,
relative level of economic equality.
yeah, I wouldn't make that observation either. My observation would be that economic equality is tethered and tied to social equality. And, there's no way to draw a clear line or distinction over what's more important along the progress of endless regression back in history. You never get to a starting point where somebody had the first economic power to start, to or not for that matter, to start that cycle into economic power and control. So both of those circumstances are basically infinitely regressible and, maybe zero sum games. I'm not sure. With exacerbations is what I would say. It's like looking at a sine wave. Sometimes they're stronger, sometimes they're weaker. But that's my opinion. Anyways, I'm not trying to take anyone's opinion from them. And, Herakles, I want you to, you're welcome to your opinion there. I think maybe all three of us might have a slight different take, but that's okay. Maybe we can bring Don in, and Don can tell us what his take. That would be a good equal. Well, maybe not, because then we'll be even numbered. But whatever. Let's do it anyway.
So yeah, I tend to agree with Herakles that economic equality and social equality are they're codependent. One depends on the other. If that's what and if I'm getting your take wrong, correct me. But they're definitely codependent. We don't live in a world of white people, but we do act like, at least in this country, that we live in a world of white people, and that the institutions, the way laws are written, the way people who are the decision makers design those decisions, whether conscious or not, have to step on a certain class or a certain race or some other disadvantaged individual just to make a policy that is best for the most number. And that number is never 100%. It's always at the disadvantage of someone else. I don't know how to fix that. I don't know how to address it, but I can state that is probably the number one issue. But how do you make policy for so many different opinions and ways of life and cultural norms that other people may find strange?
I mean, I have my own opinions on how, but opinions are like assholes, and I am one. So,
Hmm.
Tivo, did you want to say something?
I just I can get into why I think that we're in a cycle where those things seem to be pitted against each other, and I think I have and again, I think the solution is making sure that there's democratic control over economic means. But I'm sorry, just in my study of history, times of social progress among the population comes from times of relative economic growth and stability, and that if you are not going to have that, the times when minorities do best is under authoritarian rule, not under widespread, um, not under relatively free conditions, shall we say. Um, minorities tend to do better under authoritarian rule than they do under more democratic rule. But this is because because we keep splitting ideology and economics. So again, this is why a lot of Democrats would rather support shall we say liberal dictators over democratic socialists or democratic conservatives, even democratic. So like I don't, I'm not explaining this very well. I have not expressed this out loud before. So I've heard others express this out loud before, but um let me put it this way. A lot of liberals, if there's a conflict between democracy and their liberal ideals, they will choose their liberal ideals over democracy. And I think that's a mistake in the long term, because you are essentially saying that people are not capable of governing their lives, and so you wind up erring on the side of technocracy and on elite rule and on expertise and on authority, and you're basically telling people that they are incapable of running their own lives and making their own decisions.
Hmm.
And you
Would you consider this a libertarian approach?
I don't understand
Oh,
the
okay.
question.
My fault. Libertarianism, just some form of autonomy, freedom, you know, that systems impose some sort of will on you that shouldn't be allowed. It's what it sounded like. It sounds like, and I could be completely wrong. I'm just trying to understand you.
I suppose in some sense
Mm,
there's some parallels there. I wouldn't go so far because libertarians also don't believe in that people are social, or that
that's not true. That's not necessarily
I mean
true.
it depends, but
Yeah,
yes,
right. It depends on
it
your
depends. It
take on
depends on which kind of
libertarianism.
libertarian, I suppose.
If you
But
take the political, colloquial, sensationalized views of libertarian, yeah, sure, like
yeah,
communism,
yeah.
if somebody says communism, all of a sudden you're evil and you want 1984 Orwellian dystopian future. I mean, it's McCarthyism. It's all those same things all over again. When I'm talking about libertarianism and like the libertarian freedom in the most, rudimentary understanding of that, meaning that we should impose on people as little as possible, if you will.
Well, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily a matter of imposition. It's who's doing the imposing. Is this the self-imposition or is this a top-down imposition?
Mm,
And so, um,
okay. Well, cool. Look, I think we've diverged a bit, and I think we're way off the original topic now. So I want to. Does
I
anybody
think
have
we are
anything? Anybody have anything they want to talk about or say regarding that? Um, Heracles.
So, do you want me to go back to Marxism, or do you want me to comment on what you guys were discussing?
You do what you feel, man. If you feel you have some things that wanted to be addressed there, feel free. If you want to just wrap it back around, we could wrap it back around. What do you feel like, man?
I'd have to comment on one thing that I noticed right now. So that's it, okay. So yeah, so your idea that democracy is ultimately the foundation and people should have the right to self-impose views. The problem in that, in my opinion, is the fact that even in such a scenario when you have a democracy and people impose their views upon others in the sense that they impose it upon themselves, right? Of course, but that's not true. You cannot have a unanimous agreement about such matters. You can never have it. Even in a democracy, there's always going to be dissent. It is just the nature of democracy to have dissent. This is what makes something a democracy, that you have dissent. And now, once you realize that, the problem becomes that you cannot say it's self-imposition. It cannot be self-imposed because there are people in the society that do not want it imposed. They are not self-imposing it upon themselves. Like if you take it at face value, if you take it at face value, you'll realize that there are people in every society that are obliged to abide by laws that they do not believe in. Even that is true for dictatorship, that is true for democracy, that is true for any form of government that you could ever build up, except for anarchy, right? That's just how governments function, that is just how rules function, that's just how laws function. Now, and to me, democracy is simply this. And that you might have a disagreement. Of course, democracy in its utmost sense just means people's rule, right? And now you could speak about how that somehow facilitates socialism and communism and how it could facilitate equality of wealth, equal distribution, all of it. You could say. But the thing is that democracy at the very core of it is just one thing. People convincing, those leaders convincing, those representatives convincing the people that they should vote for them and vote for their policies because those policies somehow benefit the people that are there. That's all it is. It's just a process of convincing people. It is just a process of politicians convincing their populace that they are the best leaders that they could ever get. That's all it is. And if you put it that way, you would realize that it doesn't make sense to call it self-imposition because people do not, and cannot, or more often than not, select their own rules.
I would just say that psychologically speaking, there is a difference between uh, you and the people around you coming to a decision versus someone above you coming to a decision. Even if it's not one that you don't, even if it's one that you do not like or disagree with or hate,
Hmm.
there is a psychological difference in the way that people respond to that. There's a difference between the way they respond to their parent making a decision versus their friend group making a decision. It's just it's different. It's not the same. Second, I would also say that I maybe I didn't explain this, but make this clear, but I do not consider representative democracy to be meaningfully democratic in any way. Democracy means direct democracy, insofar as I am concerned, or at the very least that it is can be altered by direct democracy at any given moment. So you may have representatives, you may have things, but you can also go against your representatives on a dime, as it were. Because I do think there is a substantive difference in the way people would respond to that psychologically as well. You know, I do not consider this idea that Fauci makes decisions about public health to be democratic. That is not democratic. And that went very poorly on account that our government apparatus is not democratic. And to the extent that there were states or localities and people that wanted to do things differently, that they should have done things differently, regardless of what any authority had to say on the matter, regardless. I only use that as a specific example. I do not because I want to discuss that specifically.
Herakles, response?
Absolutely. I actually wouldn't respond to this because there's this fundamental disagreement about the entire structure of democracy here. Because he's speaking for now direct democracy. I have nothing against direct democracy per se. I just don't think it actually happens to take place right now. It might
Mhm.
take place in the future, but it doesn't exist in the proper sense.
Yeah, overtly, I don't think it does. I would agree with that. It is. I like the idea. I do like the idea. It's a good concept. Whether the things that we do today that are so far away from direct democracy are contributory to a lot of the circumstances that we're seeing evolve today is also suspect in question. I'm not certain. Um, so there were some other things said, and damn it, I'm going to lose it now. Yeah, well, so as far as democracy or I think what was said was making the difference between people making a decision together versus somebody in an authoritative state or a dominant state over you making you make a decision. I think TiVo is taking that stance where there is a distinguishable difference, and if you resolve it to that distinguishable difference, that we can have successful evolutions of these processes. I think that's what's going on there. But I would kind of reframe that again and say I don't think there's a distinguishable enough difference to say, the moment you're dealing with another person, you're dealing with some imbalance of power, some influence, whether it be conscious or unconscious. So I reach that nebulous place again of where do we draw the line of where what started, which we really can't, in my opinion. So, um, yeah, that would just be my difference of understanding there. Um, anyways, does anybody have anything else to say?
I have a solution to this problem. I have a simple solution. And I'll say this works regardless of whether you take the view of Thibault or you take my view on this matter. So what you do is that you pursue both social equality and economic equality, whichever one precedes the other, you'll have equality at the end of it.
Yeah, if
You
it
pursue
does,
both.
yes. Yeah, I would agree. If that is the answer and that's what you pursue, yeah,
At the end of the day, it does not matter whether Thibault is right or I'm right. The only
true.
thing that matters is that we bring about equality that we need in this world.
Yeah, I agree. I think we can all agree there. I think that's what our theme here is today and what we were talking about originally that Marx was for it. He really wanted equality, but it's a super seemingly intangible thing.
Yeah. We must continue to strive for it, persevere for it. We must keep on wanting it and keep on asking for it, but in a democratic fashion. I do also believe in democracy, so in a democratic fashion, pursuing it in our policies, pursuing it in our habits, pursuing it in our very being. And once we do that, all of us somehow become united. Even if we could only get about 55% of our country's population to do so, you have it. There's little that could stop you at that point.
Mm,
If all 55% people are actually united in getting it and are persevering for it, there's very little that a government could do to prevent it
mm,
at the end of the day, unless they forget about it after a while. If there's something that they do not care enough in the long term. But if they care about it for the long term, it's going to happen.
yeah. Well, that's where it becomes nebulous again, in my opinion, because as soon as our goals change, that whole thing gets thrown out of the water, you know.
That's true. Yeah.
Don, you got anything you want to
But yeah,
add? Oh, do you have something else, Heracles?
no, I was just agreeing to it. That's all.
Okay. Don, you got anything you want to add there, man? Don is in the background there. So, Tivo, you got anything else to say?
Nothing in particular, no.
Okay, cool, awesome. Um, so, should we cut it off here? Do we, what do you want to do?
I believe we should conclude it.
You should what?
We should conclude it. I mean, cut it off. Yeah.
Put it off, like end it, you mean?
Yeah, that's what I said. Yeah.
Okay,
Do
cool.
you want to continue it? What?
No, I just wanted to be sure I was clear. I was hearing what I was hearing. So, okay, cool.
Yeah.
Well, then awesome. It was a fun discussion today. Thank you everyone for who joined in. I really appreciate it.